Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this latest edition of North Somerset Live, where members of the executive of North Somerset Council, so that's leading councillors, try and take your questions live on the social media channels that we operate across North Somerset. So the idea is if you can put any of your questions in the comments or message us, and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can in the next hour. And we're going to kick off with a couple of questions that were put on our Facebook page earlier today in advance, and we'll try and flow through as many as we possibly can. Tonight's edition is focused very much on the council budget position, because you will know that the council has to go through a process every year of setting our budget, including looking at how we're going to fund services and also, of course, council tax levels. So we're very keen to talk to you and answer your questions around our budget, our finances and our spending priorities. But we'll try and get into as many questions as we can first, and then cover off any other themes that we can in the next hour. So the first question that we had in advance was from Rod, who was asking if the council is not in a position to fully deliver its services or needs to make cuts, then can we try and help people take action for themselves? And he particularly wants to make sure that the council is encouraging and enabling people to do things in their own community, whether that's clearing the streets of litter or helping improve the environment. So I'm going to pass that one over to my colleague, Annemieke Waite, to answer that one.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod. So my name is Annemieke Waite, and I'm the Executive Member for Climate, Waste and Sustainability. And I'm the councillor for the Winford ward. And I absolutely appreciate your question, because I do think it's a really important one for us to be addressing. So I know that within my own ward, for instance, we have quite a few people who are extremely engaged and busy doing small scale things throughout the community that are really, really beneficial, and that very often are because they're not being picked up in any other way. So for instance, we have a very, very active litter picking group that works in and around Felton near the airport, who literally collect litter by the sackfuls and collect it all in one place. And sometimes they have 10, 12 bags of litter that they collect every fortnight, and that then gets collected by the council staff in one go. But all the hard work has been done by the community. And I think that there are a number of different ways in which residents can be really helpful to the work that we all want to be doing. And yes, it's absolutely true that with some of our budget cuts, there are going to have to be things that we can't really do as a council, and it would be really helpful to us if residents wanted to pick up some of those things that we can no longer do. And that's definitely in the area of weeding some of the weeds outside their homes in their communities, whether this to do with maintaining some of the parklands and the tree. And I've definitely heard people talk about tree cutting, for instance, in very small scale issues. So the one thing that I would always say is that these things have to be reasonable. They have to be done with a lot of common sense and with a really clear idea of residents staying safe in the work that they do. So we can't have anybody litter picking on a dual carriageway. That makes absolute common sense. But where you want to do that in your own community, that would be really helpful, and we would absolutely welcome that. If you do have any questions over that, or if within your community you feel that there are things you would like to do, I would always recommend you contact your local ward councillor first and discuss with them the problem that you've noticed that isn't being addressed, and ask their advice, and they will more than happily work with you and get something going in your local community. But yes, absolutely, the more community spirit and the more community work we can do together, the better it is.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Annemieke. So the second question that we had posted earlier was from Aid, who's worried that there's too much overspending in some parts of the council, and he particularly quotes concerns about decisions that are made around things like school transport, and he quotes an example of where people are being ferried around in taxis when they could be using public transport. So I'm going to ask Catherine Gibbons to tackle that one.
Thank you. Yes, hi, I'm Catherine Gibbons. I'm a councillor for Milton in Weston, and I'm also the executive member for Children's Services, Lifelong Learning and Skills. So this does kind of fall within my portfolio. And I mean, Ada is right in that parents are responsible in most cases for ensuring their child attends school, and that means that they should take the actions to make sure that they can get there and work, you know, with them to make sure they get the bus. And we have all sorts of really good programs. I know my colleague Anamika is very well aware of our programs to promote sustainable travel, and we've given awards to a number of local schools who really do that well. But in the cases of children who have special educational needs, we have a statutory obligation to make sure that they're able to get to the school that's named in their EHCP, that's their Education Healthcare Plan. And that may not be as close as walking distance, and they may not indeed be able to walk there. So on those occasions, you may well see that a couple of children, or indeed a child, is being taken to their school or their place of education by a taxi. It isn't a standard thing. It's really not, it's, let's say, an alternative that's absolutely necessary for that particular child. And we constantly review the providers to make sure that they're giving the right sort of transport. It often requires that there's a personal assistant that can travel with the child because of their particular anxieties and needs. But it isn't in any sense, I would say, a wasteful action. It is something that is absolutely necessary to make sure that that young person can attend education and get there in a way that means that they're able to learn when they arrive. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Really helpful in addressing that question. So the next one we've got is from Edward, who wants to know how much the council spends on maintenance work on its own buildings, and particularly using approved contractors versus getting local companies involved to do the work instead. So I know this is something you're very engaged in, Mark. So Mark Hannaford, do you want to address that one?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Yeah, not directly responsible for those works, but where I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about that is we know that our buildings aren't in good enough condition now. They aren't in great condition. We don't spend enough, but we do publish every bit of expenditure on the website in terms of the procurement and the contracts. However, I have run with the economy team at North Somerset several procurement opportunities to try and get small local businesses involved in bidding for those contracts. And that's something we need to put out our economy team email and those the website on that, where you can possibly pick up those contracts moving forward if that's what you're seeking. But we do look for smaller business to do those contracts. We have used smaller business to do contracts in the town over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's something that we all are very keen to see more of. The frameworks are generally used to try and get people to do the larger jobs, which you do need major construction companies to do. But the smaller stuff we do need people to do. And it is published. So these are published. We just need to make sure you know where that is. So probably lacking that we're not doing that as well as we should. And I will get onto that.
Thanks very much, Mark. That's really helpful. So the final question that we had in advance, at least on the Facebook page, was from Lucas, who was asking, you know, why don't we just declare ourselves bankrupt if we've got financial problems and let the government make the hard decisions? And it's tempting. It is tempting, you know, because certainly as elected councillors, we get a lot of flack all the time for things that don't go wrong and some of the decisions that we make. And it's certainly tempting to say, well, look, we're doing our best and we can do no more, and throw it at the government. But what that means in practice, if that happened, was that the government would appoint commissioners. So they would be external people from outside of North Somerset who would come in. They wouldn't be elected. by anyone. They would have no connection to North Somerset, and they would come in and they would immediately start to implement a programme of cutbacks and tax increases, because that's exactly what's happened in other areas. So if you look around the country at areas where a council has got into difficulties with their finances and effectively become bankrupt, what you see is a pattern of cuts and of big council tax increases, and it goes on for years and years. So this is not a quick fix if government commissioners get appointed, and we don't have any local control. And what it doesn't mean, by the way, is it doesn't mean that your councillors all get the sack, and it doesn't mean that all the council officers get the sack. They're all still there. So it doesn't. So those of you that sometimes say to me, well, if you were all out, you know, if you all got kicked out, we'd be better off. Well, that won't happen if commissioners come in. All that will happen is we'll lose local control, and you'll have all of those negative effects anyway. So that's why we're working really hard to avoid that situation completely, and are trying to put in front of you the challenges and the difficulties that we've had during the course of this year. I'm really confident that we can avoid getting into a Section 114 and a bankruptcy position, but it's absolutely important for us to set out why we are at that sort of risk and what we've been trying to do to tackle our financial position. So I hope that helps, and we're certainly doing our very best to balance the books over the medium term. So we've got an interesting one that's come in for Councillor Clayton, and I think this is a valid one. It's probably not the most relevant to the council budget, but James, can you confirm what changes Jessie wants to know that you've made to your dream team this week?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. Well, that's an interesting one. I've had to really sort of study the form of the players currently, and the two changes I have made is Isaac and Cole Palmer.
There we go. A couple of good players, and definitely in form. As a Liverpool fan, I'm very disappointed to see Cole Palmer playing so well, because we need Chelsea to do a bit worse. So it's good to see we're in touch with what's going on in the world of sport. Whilst you're on, James, we did have a question in advance from a Mr. Duke, who was concerned about rumours that he'd heard that we were going to have to make some cutbacks to the community safety team, and was pointing out that a lot of the evidence in terms of some of our surveys and research is that community safety is really important to the community. So I just wondered if you wanted to say something about what we're doing around community safety.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And yeah, it's a very good and valid question. So yes, there are potential cutbacks in relation to community safety. Unfortunately, it's not a statutory service that the council have to provide, but it is an important service that the council recognises to be important. So what we are looking to doing is contacting towns and parish councils to see whether or not they can look to help with community response officers that we currently employ. We have 2 that are currently employed that cover the whole of the district. So at the moment we are in talks with towns and parishes in relation to helping us in providing that service and taking it forward. We have, so going back, there is what's called a Safer Streets Fund that is that councils can apply to the Home Office for. Going back a couple of Safer Street funds, we applied for a mobile CCTV van. That has just recently reached us after being in the works for a couple of years, having equipment attached to it. It's an electric vehicle as well. So since we've had that in place, our community safety team, have been out doing various safer streets action days around the district. They've been in Peel, they've been in the town centre on more than one occasion, and also on the Bourneville estate. And this gives the opportunity for residents and visitors to the town to come and speak to the team, to share their concerns and get an idea of what the team does. Because I think a lot of the times people are very sort of unaware of what ASB actually occurs in North Somerset. I'll give you an example. I had a lady that contacted me some time ago in relation to low-level ASB with youth throwing eggs at her house. Now, she reported that to the police, but unfortunately with the vast amounts of cases that the police have, this is what's deemed as low level. So therefore, a community response officer went out to this lady and spoke to her at length, visited her a number of times, tried to get the information that they could in relation to the ASB that was being caused on towards her, and with success managed to speak to the youths and have that issue around the egg throwing being resolved. So the community response officers do play a vital part within North Somerset in tackling antisocial behaviour. And there's been many cases where, it's been proven to be a success. So hopefully talks will be strong with the towns and parishes, and we can keep that service intact.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, James. And the next question is from David on Facebook, which is, he's asking, when is the planning meeting for the Tropicana, please? So do you want to pick that one up, Mike Solomon, and not just cover off the planning meeting, but also where we are with the Tropicana project?
Thanks, Mike. Yes, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, we're at the moment we're fairly well advanced with the project, and we're very much on time. We've had various consultation meetings showing the plans of what we're planning to do there. We're now down the road with the procurement side, so we'll be shortlisting for the people taking it over. So the plans have been out there for people to see. The planning will go in now. I would imagine it will be January that the actual planning goes in to the panel. But it's all on schedule. And as I said, we've had consultation meetings that both Mark and myself turned up to. People have had their opportunities to have a look at what we're doing there. And it's all very exciting, to tell you the truth. I think people are going to be pleased when eventually it's delivered.
Thanks very much, Mike. And obviously, in the context of our budget pressures, it's really important to underline that the work that we're undertaking at the Tropicana and the work at Burnbeck Pier and the work at Marine Lake has been funded by government grants, and we can't use that money for anything else. So we were given £20 million in grant from the Levelling Up Fund, as it was called. And they can only be used for those projects and only used for one-off capital investments. So we can't use it for day-to-day spending, and we can't divert it into other things. So that's why sometimes you will see changes in terms of our day-to-day spending and the pressures there, but big spending on some other projects, and that's just the way local government finance works. Now, in true BBC style, I'm going to go to a question where I've been accused of not actually asking the question, and there's been a little bit of banter, shall I say, on social media about whether we will cover this subject. So I've got a question from Simon, and I know that he's talking about a specific case, but we'll try and keep it a bit general here. So Simon wants to know why monies can be paid out to subcontractors who are working on behalf of North Somerset, where the standard of workmanship isn't good enough, or in some cases where the work has not even been commenced. And I know that Simon is referring to a specific set of circumstances in an individual case, but the general point is really important and well made, because it shouldn't be happening, of course. It absolutely shouldn't be happening in the terms that you've described. Payments shouldn't be made for substandard work, and payments absolutely shouldn't be made where no work has even started or been completed. We absolutely do have good processes in place to go out and inspect work that's undertaken by our contractors, and we have procurement managers and contract managers whose job it is to go out and carry out inspections and check on work. But what I would say is that is not a team that is resourced well enough to do it as comprehensively as we would like. So I think we have got more work to do to make sure that where we are contracting private companies to carry out work on our behalf, that we're making sure that they're doing what they've been paid to do and that they're doing it in the most efficient and effective way possible. I don't know, James or Catherine, whether you want to add anything, because I know you're familiar with some of the details of the specific case, and feel free to say no.
I wouldn't want to because it would entail going into details that I wouldn't want to put publicly about anybody. But your points are well made. We're very well aware that we should make sure we're absolutely on top of how we pay contractors and that the work required is done to the highest possible standard.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I've got a question from John on, I think, YouTube, which is exciting in itself. So John asks, if 80% of our budget cannot be adjusted, isn't our task of reducing expenditure by 50 million impossible? Well, and it's certainly very difficult, is how I would frame it, John. And what John's referring to is that the great bulk of what we spend as a council are on what we call statutory services. So they're things that we are legally obliged to provide by government legislation. So particularly things like children's services, social care support, some education support, social care for adults, and we use the term social care for adults, but what we mean by that is things like help with independent living, Meals on Wheels service, residential and nursing care, help to live independently at home if you're a working age adult with learning difficulties or a disability, for example. And the vast majority of our money, something like 80% of our budget, is absolutely spent on those services where we don't have a lot of discretion and we don't have a lot of options. And that's definitely what's been driving a lot of our financial pressures over the last few years. The demand for those services has gone up. So the number of people needing those services has gone up. And that's because people have been living longer, people have been living with more complex needs. And actually, there's been some fallout from the COVID pandemic, which has impacted that. But the other issue has been the cost of providing those services, which has also gone up. And in a lot of those areas, particularly social care, we are generally dependent on private sector providers to deliver a lot of the services. And it's a very limited competitive marketplace where we know that there is very little we can do to manage and mitigate some of those cost pressures. So those two things taken together do make things very difficult. And you're absolutely right. It makes it really hard because we've then got to deliver a lot of our efficiencies and cost savings and cuts from the kinds of visible things that you will see rather than those less visible statutory services. Is there anything any colleagues want to particularly highlight in respect of that challenge that we've got between the discretionary visible services and the statutory services?
Nothing there, Mike. But the one thing people try to explain, I suppose, is because of that exact reason that has just simply been highlighted. This is why the services that we charge for are under pressure as well, because that's the only discretionary area we have to try and raise income. So even though people get a little bit cross about inflationary increases, it's the only way we can keep up with charges and try and balance the books.
Catherine?
I was just going to add also, obviously in the area that I cover, a huge amount of it is statutory work. What's often quite difficult for us is that those areas where we are able to make savings are non-statutory, but they are also the sort of areas that are actually delivering sort of the things we want to do, the preventative work, the work that's going to benefit people before they start to need our services. So that's one of the ironies of facing these challenges, isn't it? That we might be actually not able to spend as much as we want to on the areas that would, in the long term, mean that we have less pressure on our statutory services. So that's why I think we're all so hopeful of a good settlement from the government in the coming weeks.
Absolutely, and it's probably worth just mentioning that before I move on to the next question. Our funding comes from a number of different sources. So some of it comes from council tax, some of it comes from fees and charges. So that's things like parking charges or the garden waste collection charge and things like that. And then some of it comes from central government. And what has happened over the last few years is there's been a steady reduction in the proportion of money that we get from central government. So that's why you hear lots of local councils talking about a decade of austerity, because over time, less and less money as a proportion has come from central government and more has had to come from council tax. But actually, our council tax is capped by central government as well. So we're not able to increase council tax by more than 5%, even if we were able to make a case for that to you as our local council taxpayers. So it makes it really difficult because we're not in control of our cost pressures in terms of particularly social care and statutory funding, but we're not completely in control of our ability to generate income either. So it really is the sort of perfect storm in terms of creating an environment where it's really difficult to deliver the long-term investment that we need to transform our services and keep the show on the road in the short term as well. So lots of issues to think about in that context. Right, so I've got another question which is from Lucas, which is about Burnbeck Pier. How much is that going to cost us? So Mark, do you want to say something about the costs and where the money's coming from, but also how we're going with that project as well?
Yep, thank you, Lucas. So the three tranches of money here, the fact we've already started work on the land side, which we were given from lottery, £4.5 million, and partly levelling up monies, which is now effectively just considered government grant. And that was to do essential works on the island. It was to do the rock face. It was to also repair the buildings on the land side of the pier. So there'll be a cafe and the pier master's cottage will be renovated in that sort of area there. And then we're working with the RNI English Heritage. The Lottery Heritage Fund, as you might have seen recently, gave 10 million to the council to fund the pier itself, the renovation of the pier itself. And again, some government grant is in that, which equates to just under £20 million. So with partners, North Somerset's been able to get that money together, and that will allow then the RNI to build its new lifeboat stations on the island itself. Now, the whole job isn't fully funded, so the island work, the safety work has been done, and the works that were needed to protect the island itself from the weather and some of the roofs on the buildings there, which are going to be saved. But we still need to find further funding, and we're working really hard to do that. In terms of timescales, we hope to some the island works have been done, as you might have seen, and just to come back to value for money, done under budget, which was absolutely great news. And we have started the works on the land side. Some major works need to be done there to get the electricity from the main substation into the island, because we're expecting greater use, so that has to be done. And then we hope to start the actual island work, the pier work itself, sometime later next year. So the middle of the year we're pushing for, assuming all things are even. So hopefully we'll see good work going on in the next 12 months, and people will recognize that actually the whole thing has started and we'll be achieving some really good results. And to, just to make sure people are aware, this is not being funded by your council. So the council have one officer working on this, and everything else is funded by grant.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. I think it's just worth noting that it's been fantastic to see the progress that's been made already, and the success of the teams that have been involved, including the Burnbeck Regeneration Trust volunteers for all their hard work as well, and the success in getting funding in. And I know Mike is one of the Burnbeck Regeneration trustees, so has been doing a lot of great work as well, along with the other volunteers to make a difference. Okay, so the next question I've got is from Niall, who is asking, can we be assured that the current year's bus and bus infrastructure improvements that have already been announced will be finalised and completed during this financial year? So people will know that we were very successful in securing one of the biggest bus service improvement plan pots of funding in the country a few years ago, and we've been delivering a, I'm going to say, mixed bag of bus service improvement plan works. There's been lots of investment in supporting new bus routes and more frequent bus services. We're just about to kick off with a programme of upgrades to several hundred bus stops to improve the passenger experience and get some more natural bus hubs and interchange locations in our major towns. We've run the successful birthday bus scheme, which has really encouraged more people to get on the buses, supported care leavers, done more for young people. So lots of positive work that's happened. We've also had some bus priority schemes, and that's where I say I think it is fair to say it's been a bit of a mixed bag, and we've been on a learning curve in terms of what works and what doesn't and how best to deliver bus infrastructure. We will absolutely be continuing to deliver some of the works that we planned for the current year. We've just had an allocation from the government for a further year of bus service funding, but with much more flexibility in terms of how we can spend that. So we will be looking to sustain some of these improvements and particularly investing in the frequency of services next year. I wonder, just whilst we're on buses, Annemieke, if you just want to give a shout out to the West local work and particularly your success in your area, because I think it's a really good example of a community-led approach that has made a real difference to an area that can't sustain commercial services.
Thank you, Mike. I'd be quite happy. Actually, I can talk about it for the next half hour if you like, because it's really exciting. So when I became a councillor a year and a half ago, the thing that my residents were telling me in my ward was that the key thing that they felt they lacked was access to public transport. There were no bus services at all in Felton, Winford, Redhill, Dundry, and it really is problematic when you live in an area like that, because it means you can't go to the shops, you can't go to the doctor, you can't get your kids to school. And so I was absolutely determined that if I could get a bus service up and running, that is what I wanted to do. I found out that that West Local, which is part of the WECA bus funding, but with support from North Somerset Council, had a pot of money set aside for communities to design their own public transport. And I always felt that if that was going to work, that it had to be something that was going to be planned from the bottom up. So not a bus company coming in and saying, we're going to put a bus and it's going to go here, there and there. And so I started a survey in my local ward and an online survey, to which over a couple of weeks' time, I had 200 responses. I asked people where they wanted to go, what their favourite bus stops would be, where they wanted to start, where they wanted to finish, what the times would be for their journeys. Anyway, you can imagine what it was like. And so in the end, we came up with a bus service that really aims to suit every single person in my ward. Well, not every single perhaps, but as many as possible. So there is a commuter service that now runs into Bristol in the morning, comes back at the end of the day. Then there is a service that goes mid-morning into Bristol for people who want to go shopping or who might have doctor's appointments or just want to go for leisure services. That comes back early afternoon. And then very randomly in the middle of the afternoon, the bus actually goes to Backwell and picks up about 10 children who don't have access to home school transport, but they get picked up from Backwell Secondary School. And then as the bus then does its usual route through Felton, Winford, Dundry, it drops all those kids off at their homes, which means that it's transformational for their parents, because they now have the option to go back to work because their kids can go to school in the morning. They don't have to be at the school gates at 3:15 to pick them up. So it's a trial for a year and a half, and we've got funding for a year and a half, and it's been really incredible to listen to residents tell me how much this has changed their lives. I see elderly people at the bus stop who haven't left the village on their own on a bus for, well, since forever, and who've really felt incredibly isolated. And, you know, a lot of people just can't afford to book a taxi to take them to go somewhere. And people are very excited. They get the bus and they say, well, I'm going to take the bus to the city centre, I'm going to do some shopping, going to walk around, and then at the end of the day they come back and they've had a really good day out. So it works for commuters, and I use the bus now. If I need to go to Weston, I take the bus into Bristol, hop on the train, and quite regularly we have, it's a minibus, it's a tiny little minibus, and quite regularly we have 10, 11 people on a commuter journey into Bristol, which means that that's 10 cars less going into the city. Now that may seem minimal, but ultimately, if we want to do something about getting people out of cars and into buses, this is the kind of service that I really believe we need to be providing. So it's a trial. We're going to monitor it very carefully. We're looking at the moment whether we can have a bit of expansion funding to do a few more things, like perhaps even have a bus that goes in on a Saturday. But it's been very successful. The bus company is really pleased, and I really hope that it's a little bit of a blueprint for how things could be done if the government actually gave us some more money for bus transport, because communities deserve bus services and rural communities need them just as much as people in towns and cities. So I was really pleased, very, very happy.
Great stuff, and a real success story. Catherine.
Can I just add a couple of points while we're talking about buses, just to say how much the free bus travel for care experienced young people has meant, and that in even the birthday bus offer has shown that there have been a large number of people who've made bus journeys that they wouldn't have done otherwise and are looking to use the bus more in the future. And above all, to give a shout out to the fact that we're continuing the electrification works, the bus depot in Weston-super-Mare, because we are going to have a fleet of brand new electric buses arriving in March, I think. 24 brand new electric buses from the Zebra programme, isn't it? Annemieka's is well aware of this as well. And that will be serving two of our most popular routes, the X1 and the X4. So not only are we getting more people using the buses, but we are going to have much more sustainable modern buses, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely right, and we should note that that's a combination of government funding and shock horror investment by First Bus as well. So it's a really pleasing project that shows the commitment to improving bus services in the area. Absolutely. So the next question is from Peter. It's another one on the Tropicana, so I'm going to throw this one to you, Mike Solomon. And Peter says that the Tropicana consultation that we ran earlier in the year didn't actually show the detail of the new building and the materials and colours and so on. Will this be made available before the planning application goes in? Or I suspect it will be at the same time, and we'll be asking people to feed back through the planning application consultation. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Peter. We didn't have those fuller plans. They came into place when a contractor was chosen, and then their architect got to work on the final drawings and the final plans. That you're quite right. They have been seen by disability groups to get their input. So we have had that consultation, and they will be available around the time of the planning. I mean, we've no plans to put them out beforehand, but I will come back on that one. But you will definitely get to see them, and also if you turn up at the planning meeting, see them at the planning meeting. But I will check, Peter, to see if there will be an opportunity to actually see those finalised plans before the planning.
Great stuff, thank you. So the next question I've got is from Mike, who is talking about the work to Clevedon Seafront and the costs associated with that. and also, you know, why people, has there been any redress? Why are people not being held to account? So just to be clear, mistakes were absolutely made in terms of how the Clevedon Seafront project was progressed. We held a number of public meetings in Clevedon last year when I became leader of the council, and listened to the feedback from residents, and we committed to an independent review that produced recommendations in terms of our project management and auditing process, which we fully implemented. I would point out that the relevant senior councillor and indeed leader of council is no longer in office, that were responsible. So definitely people were held accountable for some of the decisions that were made. And what we did commit to is putting things right and implementing the recommendations of the independent review. And we've absolutely done that and budgeted for that. And that work will be starting in the new year. What I would say is, in the scale of our I've heard a lot of people saying, if you hadn't wasted money on Clevedon Seafront, your finances wouldn't be in the situation they are. You know, I don't want to be flippant, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to the scale of what we're spending on social care services. And so I absolutely wish we hadn't made mistakes, and I wish we'd got it right the first time. But we didn't, and all we can do is learn the lessons and get it right next time, and we're absolutely committed to doing that. What I would also say is that we all want this to be a council where, if we get things wrong, we hold our hands up and we admit that, and we listen to the feedback, and then we try and put it right. And that's the commitment that all of us will make to you. We're definitely not perfect, and I can guarantee that you will continue to find things that you don't like and things that you think we've got wrong, and dare I say, things that we've wasted money on. But we will absolutely try and listen to feedback and put it right. And I'm happy again to just put on record, and we've done this several times, I really apologise to the people of Clevedon who had to fight hard to get us to listen and to put it right, which should not have happened. Okay, I'm going to go back to the question from Simon because he's thanked us for addressing his question earlier, but he's again just raising the issue of whether we're getting value for money from some of our contract arrangements, and cites examples of potholes and fly tipping. And I know there's been a couple of other comments along these lines as well about, are we always good enough in terms of our contract management? And I'm going to invite a few colleagues to comment on this, because I do think that I would absolutely hold my hands up and say it's not perfect. And I think all of us as councillors see examples of road repairs that aren't quite good enough. Certainly, do all of our waste crews do a gold standard job every single time? No, they don't. And what can we do to try and improve some of those things? So, Annemieke, do you want to just say something about what we're trying to do to work with our waste company, NSEC, to improve crew training and the experience for customers?
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm sure that everyone who's listening to us this evening will be aware that we're moving to 3 weekly black bin collections in the spring. That's a decision that was made a few months ago, and it was not a decision that we took lightly, but it was a necessary decision. It is going to be implemented in spring, but at the same time as not collecting our black bins more than once every 3 weeks, we're also going to be improving considerably our recycling options for residents, and that's the really important thing. So we will be introducing soft plastics that will be collected every single week, and everybody's food waste and recycling and soft plastics will be collected on a weekly basis. So when we look at the contents of our black bins, on average, about 45% of what's in there should really not be in there. And so we've taken the decision that actually by collecting them less often, but making other options available to residents, we're actually going to be increasing the recycling. The thing that we often forget is that actually there is value in our recycling. It's not just stuff that gets thrown away. It's stuff that can be reused and literally recycled into new goods. And so by throwing things in the black bin, they just end up in landfill, and that's a complete waste of money and a waste of resources, and it's ultimately terrible for our environment. So there are ways in which we can make those things better, and while we're doing while we're introducing those changes, the other thing we're doing at the same time is making sure that we have a training program for the people who collect all our bins, because things have changed many times over the years, and there is definitely a need for a little bit of upskilling, perhaps with some of the crews, and a training program is being put in place to make sure that some of those inconsistencies that we do find in communities are going to be addressed. So the whole emphasis is on making the process better, smoother, with better results for communities as well as for us and our budgets.
Thank you very much. And Mike, do you want to say something? And it'd be also about grounds maintenance and streets and open spaces too.
Yeah, I would first I'd like to address one of the concerns that we all have, and that is fly tipping. And I think the problem is, again, the government needs to step in to make it much simpler for us to prosecute, because if you video somebody on your phone dropping fly tipping, it can't simply go to the police without you having to go to court to back that up. And of course, a lot of people won't want to go to court, so it's not easy to follow through, and we don't have a resource to keep on top of this. So I think what we have to have is, there's so much work goes into getting a prosecution that it's a very slow process. So I think we need some help from the government to make it easier for us to prosecute these people that are fly tipping. That's the one side of things. The other is, as far as parks, open spaces, clearing hedgerows, etc. We do try to tackle them with priorities, and it's not always easy, because there is such a vast amount of open space that we have to cover in North Somerset. So sometimes you'll find that your hedgerow isn't cut, and you have to wait a bit. And this comes back to what Annemieke was saying earlier, and we all spoke about people getting involved, and again, with our public rights of way, without some groups out there that go and clear those public rights of way, we wouldn't be able to maintain them. So again, it's down to volunteers and volunteer groups. They're very important to us. So that's really what I wanted to say.
Thanks very much. And what I was also just going to say is that on all of our services, please, I know people are skeptical about if anything happens if you report things, but if you do see any bad practice, or if you see a job that's been done poorly or only half done, please report that. Report it to your local ward councillor, report it to one of us as members of the executive. Go on the council website and report it, because we do have procedures in place to make sure that things are done properly. And at the end of the day, we need the eyes and ears from around the district to make sure that that's done and that action's taken. So please do that as much as you can.
Mike, can I add a comment to the fly tipping? So it's probably worth saying the area where I live is notoriously bad for fly tipping. It's a very regular occurrence. Sometimes I get reports of fly tipping twice a week, 3 times a week on a small rural lane, where literally a whole lorry load of stuff has been dumped in the middle of the road. So I'm very aware with the problems of fly tipping. I think that this is an area where parish councils and the council can work together very well if we're very organised about it. So we're in the process of getting some CCTV cameras in strategic locations where we know there is an issue. That's currently being set up, and I think that this is something that is really important, because fly tipping on its own it's going to be there, but it's how we tackle it that really matters. We do report it, and whenever we can, I know our teams are out here very regularly, and they sift through some of that rubble and try and find out where it comes from, and they are successful in that. So we have had successes with that, and I think it's really important, and I'd like to thank publicly the teams that work on our fly tipping, because they work extremely hard and they do a really good job.
Great stuff, thank you. Okay, I've got a question from Chris, which is about what are we doing to take social care back in-house and try and cut costs by doing that? And that's linked to a couple of other questions that have been asked about the cost of children's placements and residential placements and so on. So, Catherine, what are we doing to look to try and transform services, provide more services for children locally in North Somerset, so we can try and do a better service for those families, but also reduce some of our spending pressures?
Thanks, Mike. Yes, I mean, particularly on the issue of placements, and I think that's the crux of the first question, isn't it? It's about children, the cost of children's placements and bringing that in-house. So I've had the feeling for quite a while that this is something that we do need to bring back into our local North Somerset control. It isn't as straightforward as it sounds, but we are currently looking very much to do that, to bring back a service that is much more local. So we won't be forced to send children and young people to expensive placements far away from their families and from their support networks, but also so that we are delivering a better service locally. So we are actually in the process of developing a strategy around that, as my exec colleagues know, which we will be discussing in the coming weeks. And I truly believe that that will not only reduce costs, which is of course important, but it will deliver a better service for these young people. And I think across children's services, we are constantly looking at better ways to deliver the services that we do deliver, because society changes, the world moves on. The model that was ideal 10 years ago isn't necessarily the right one today. So, for example, we're actively working towards creating family hubs, which will deliver services for families with children from 0 to 19, and in the case of SEND, up to 25. Whereas the older model of children's centres was the norm. So it's change, and it's also greater flexibility and hoping to deliver the much needed services to a wider range of people, but probably in a different way from what we have done before. I mean, concentrating the core services in a smaller number of areas, doing more outreach, and also looking at a good digital offer so that people can get advice 24/7 through a creative way of using digital family hub models.
Great stuff. Thanks, Catherine. And I've lost the question now. Who is it from? There was a question that I'm going to throw at you, James, which was about why do we pay for things that are the police's responsibility? So a good question about when you look at things like CCTV and our community safety team, are we providing things and funding things that really should be the police's responsibility? It was from Tom Davis. James?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I suppose one answer is yes, we do. And obviously we fund the CCTV, which obviously the police do not contribute towards. I am currently in talks to the police about making a contribution towards CCTV, because I do feel that actually it needs to be a service that the police need to recognise that is vital for them to be able to prosecute criminals and obviously assist victims. So that is something that we are looking at to start negotiations with the police, well, the Police and Crime Commissioner in relation to that. In relation to the council having its own community response officers, I think this is a welcome addition by the council to actually provide a service for our residents of North Somerset, because actually our community response officers have accredited powers that the police have, but also they have powers that the police don't have in relation to public space protection orders that are run by the council. So although our community response officers sometimes get labelled as fake police, plastic police and stuff like that, they are actually well equipped with some really good enforcement powers and do contribute a lot to North Somerset and in making people safe.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, James. And I think it's worth emphasising that we are always challenging our partners in the public sector, whether it's the police, whether it's health, whether it's education or government. We're always challenging to do more and to invest more in North Somerset and to work closer in partnership with us. So it is definitely not the case that we just pick up the bill for things that others aren't doing. We are challenging them all the time, including with the support of some of our MPs. Okay, I've got a question from Jonathan, which is for you, Mark, I think, which is Slade Road field in Portishead safe? We previously indicated it was not going to be developed, but has there been a U-turn?
So, yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Frustratingly, yes, there has been a form of U-turn because the financial situation of the council, one, has changed. We've also had housing numbers put onto us which are extremely difficult to achieve. So I'm not saying that the situation will change entirely, but we have to put everything back on the table. We've effectively, in terms of planning and in terms of the sites that might be available for housing, have gone back to where we were in 2022 as a reset, because we're now having to find nearly 24,000 houses in North Somerset or homes to build. So we are still in conversations with Portishead Town Council around whether they would choose to buy this piece of land. And so there are still choices for councils to do. But North Somerset have a legal requirement to its taxpayers to get best value. So these are all tricky questions that we're trying to work out with Portishead Town Council. In terms of a U-turn, well, it is a sort of U-turn because we're back to where we had to be 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It is disappointing because I knew members of the residents of Portishead very much wanted that land as a park or something. So yeah, it's difficult. It's a difficult situation, but we are still trying to get through to the end of that one.
Thanks very much, Mark. Right. We've got so many questions now, I'm confusing myself. Okay, the next one's from, we've only got 2 minutes, no pressure, but we've got to keep the answer short now. Amanda says that she keeps seeing taxis with plates from out of North Somerset's area. What's going on? James?
Yeah, this has been a topic that's reached the national press of recent time, and there's no secret that I've gone on record stating that Wolverhampton now license almost a quarter of all drivers nationally, which means they are more likely to pop up in our area. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not local. So what we've got here is a situation where, well, we've got two. So we've got drivers that have taken our examination tests and failed, and then they've been directed by an operator that is looking to employ them to go and take the examinations in Wolverhampton, then come back to North Somerset and apply their business in North Somerset. We also have a situation where there is a national register of refusals and revocation of licenses. It's supposed to stop drivers effectively shopping around and getting a license after being removed from the area. The license, so that is in relation to public safety. We stick to that national register, but unfortunately, I don't think that is the same for other areas. I could talk a lot more in relation to this, but I know we're very strict for time, so I'm happy to leave it there, Mike.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thanks, James. Okay, John has asked whether we can look at increasing income in areas where homes have been extended with planning permission and where their council tax band might have changed, and also whether business rates are always applied. Unfortunately, John, this isn't a simple area because it's an independent government agency, the Valuation Office agency, that determines council tax bands and does the reassessments. And at the moment, the law says that the reassessment only happens when the house is sold. So even if somebody gets planning permission and carries out an extension on their property, we can't do anything to reband them and potentially generate more income. So there are no easy solutions on that, and it's the same actually with business rates. So again, we do notify the valuation office when we're aware of business changes and business rate changes, but they don't always go out and carry out reviews very quickly. And to be honest, it doesn't help us a lot anyway, because the government, when it decides how much grant to give you, makes assumptions about how much council tax income and business rate income you're going to get. And they take that off our grant, essentially. So it's also the reason which we get a lot of questions about, well, we've built all these new homes and you must be getting council tax from the wall. Why aren't you much better off? We absolutely do get more income as a result of building more homes, but the government takes it away from our grant. So our net position is that we're not really any better off. And in fact, we're often worse off, because all of those new residents and those new homes also require services. And you don't need very many extra children and extra older people who need care. And suddenly the net effect is that you're worse off. So unfortunately, there isn't a simple link between building more homes, getting more council tax revenue, and being better off. I'll try and just quickly see if there's any other questions that we haven't covered. Amanda has also asked about the lights, the street lights on the A371 near the Locking junction. So we are aware that there's I know there's an electrical fault with the Western Power distribution network in that area. We are chasing them to fix it. They've promised that it will be done in the next few days. They did actually carry out a fix, and the lights did work very briefly for a couple of days, but apparently the fuse blew again, and so they've had to go back and carry it out. But it absolutely, the intent is to get that sorted, but unfortunately we're dependent on the power distribution company to get it done. And then I wanted to finish actually, and I'm going to finish now on the question that was very early on, which was from Pippa, I think, who was saying that since COVID, it feels as though there's been real pressures on the council budget, and that it feels as though everybody's being asked to pay more and they're being asked to do more volunteering in the community, and yet we're going to end up with less services or poorer services. And I'm afraid you're right. That is absolutely the reality of the situation. Certainly in the near future, it will be the case that we'll be asking you to pay more and to do more, and the range of services will be poorer and lesser, because unfortunately we're between a rock and a hard place. We're by law, we've got to balance our budget and we cannot overspend. And there's only two ways you can do it. We can only balance the books by generating more income, which we can only do through your council tax and through the fees and charges you pay, and by cutting and reducing services. There's lots of efficiency that we've built into the budget for next year. So we're going to deliver, tens of millions of pounds of efficiencies and service transformations to cut costs. We're freezing councillor pay, not that we get very much anyway, but we're freezing councillor pay. We are trying to make the hard choices as well. But the reality is we cannot protect the public from every single impact of the decisions that we're having to make. And that's why we're trying to get out here, listen to you, talk to you, explain the situation that we're facing, and try and come up with ways that we can do things better and differently in the long run. But what we really need is your support in helping to make the case to government that we need reform of the system, because this is not just affecting North Somerset. Every council in the country is in the same situation. There isn't enough money to pay for the basic services we need, and there needs to be a different way of doing things, and we need that long-term reform. We know the new government is listening. They have given us some additional funding for next year, which is a help, but it's not enough. But we need them to go further and faster, and the more that we can work together to send that message, the better. I'm sorry that we've not been able to get through every single question tonight, but we're over time. So I'm going to say thank you very much to all my colleagues for their engagement. Thank you for listening and joining us online. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.